Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my spoiler-free review for A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure by Angela Bell. I did receive this copy in exchange for an honest review. I will also put content warnings for this book in the description box, so please check that out if you would like them. And this book actually has already come out. It came out just a couple of days ago on February 27th, so you are able to get it now if you are interested. And as I said, this review is not going to have spoilers. So, we are following two main characters, so this is a dual point of view novel. Our female lead is Clara, and our male lead is Theodore, although he goes by a different name for a good chunk of the book because he is trying to escape a very traumatic past connected to his family and also to some things that happened to him in the Crimean War. So he's dealing with PTSD and just a lot going on. And Clara is also dealing with a lot. She is grieving the loss of her uncle and also of her grandmother. And on top of all of that, she is terrified for her family because the man that she was previously engaged to marry has turned on her and is essentially blackmailing or threatening to blackmail her and her family if Clara doesn't marry him or give him like access to like her family's money. He says that he's going to keep spreading the rumor that her family has a history of insanity in their family, and this would have devastating consequences for them because in this time period it was very easy to get people locked up, particularly women, in these like horrible institutions. This is set in 1860, and so this is a very dangerous threat that he is making. And the way that these two characters end up crossing paths is that Claire's grandfather Drosselmeyer ends up hiring Theodore under a pseudonym to be his apprentice in his clockmaker workshop. He's also an inventor, and so the two of them really hit it off and get along. Clara and Theodore do not, however. Clara is understandably very hesitant to trust anybody, particularly young men, but the two of them are thrown together when her grandfather disappears and leaves her a trail of clues that she and Theodore have to solve together, and it ends up taking them on this tour of Europe and to all of these different cities. And as you can maybe tell from some of the character names, this is a loose retelling of the Nutcracker story, or it kind of like incorporates elements of the Nutcracker story. And also this is a Christian romance, I believe it would be considered. And this is a proper romance / Christian fiction book. I'll get into talking about more of that later. One thing I really liked and appreciated is I feel like the handling of the main characters' trauma and past, it felt pretty believable in the way that it was like affecting them in the present day. And I think it made sense why, especially on Clara's side, it would take her so long to warm up to Theodore because of the horrible betrayals that she has suffered and the way that her family has been hurt. And so even though like it could be frustrating, watching the two of them just like misunderstand each other or not see where the other person is coming from, not recognize that the other person is a good person, even though it could be frustrating, I think it made a lot of sense. And Theodore as well is like, yes, there were parts of his sort of like internal monologue or his like story, his journey that felt repetitive, but it was in a way that felt like it made sense for what he had gone through and for like the way that his trauma was being explored. And something that I really liked is that the kind of incident or the moment where Clara starts realizing like, oh, I think Theodore might actually be a good person. I might be able to trust him. I think the way that she changed her behavior towards him, maybe some people would feel it was kind of abrupt, but I actually didn't. I feel like it made a lot of sense because Clara is not a bad person, and she is not she's not like by nature somebody who doesn't like other people. It's just that she and her family have been really hurt before. And so I don't know, I thought that kind of change of opinion made sense to me. As far as the romance itself, I think like structurally I appreciated it more than the actual like romantic element. I think I wanted more time between the part where they can't stand each other and they're fighting and the part where they're like deeply in love. Is like I wanted more of that bridge time when they are starting to trust each other as allies. I just wanted more time spent on that so that it felt like we got more of a slow build to the time when they were in love with each other. I also really liked the family relationships in this book. Clara's mother actually was one of my favorite characters. She actually is part of the little expedition, the tour that Drosselmeyer has like sent them all on, and I really enjoyed her. There were a couple of things near the end that like I found a little irritating or over the top about her, but for the most part, I just had fun with her. I liked her as a character. Clara has a very eccentric family, which is part of the reason why her ex-fiance thinks it'll be really easy to convince people that they have a history of insanity. So the family element of this book is important, and I just feel like it was handled really well. I really liked how important Clara's family is to her, and I also sympathized with Clara feeling like she had to be the one to take care of everybody. Actually, this is kind of one of those cases where I feel like I was perhaps more on the main character's side than we were supposed to be, because like the story, a lot of the stories about like Clara learning to like let go and like not feel like she has to control everything, and it's like, I understand that that can be a good message, but also it's kind of true that she needs to be the one in charge, the one like keeping people safe and taking care of them. I also thought the book did a really good job of addressing the like historical reality of what our characters were experiencing or were threatened with. Like again, I feel like the handling of grief and trauma and PTSD, it was very much like, obviously we didn't, like they did not have the same terms for things that we have today, but you could see the way that the author was handling those things in a way that I think would work for modern readers, while also like using the language or the kinds of ideas that would be more appropriate for the time. And I also think that the main like conflict or the premise of the book like recognizes how incredibly dangerous it was at this time for people to be suspected of any kind of mental illness, and how horribly mentally ill people were treated. While it's not like consistently the driving force of the story, it is a very present element, and I thought that was handled with care. As far as the plot elements, I was actually really surprised at how much I enjoyed the travel element, because you guys know I'm not a big fan of like traveling or journey or road trip stories, but I really loved getting to see these characters go to these different like European cities and like visit some of the sites and like work out the clues and see where those took them. It's definitely a lot of like, you know, very well-known landmarks, but also I think a few that were maybe not as much. So that was just really cool to see and to learn about. And I feel like the descriptions of those were really beautiful and very evocative. Like I definitely felt like I could picture where they were and what things looked like. I was not the biggest fan of the main, I don't want to say I didn't like the main conflict. I think the issue was that I think it escalated in a way that I think detracted from the story overall. Like I think that we already had high stakes, and I think there were ways that we could have communicated that didn't take the story in a direction that I feel like was kind of jarring with the rest of it. And then also I mentioned at the beginning that this is like a proper romance / Christian romance, and for me personally, the way that the religious themes and elements were handled was not so much to my taste, because I really enjoy when religion is worked into a story in a way that is very like thoughtful and like nuanced and organic, and for me this just wasn't like, it wasn't like bad or offensive or anything, it just felt very like surface level in a way that doesn't usually like work for me or draw me into a story. And also like it got very, very heavy-handed with it in the last like third or so of the book, which again, it's not going to be a problem for everybody, and for some people it might be a much bigger problem than it was for me. I just didn't really care for how heavy-handed it was. And actually I should say the heaviness of the theme would not have bothered me if it was done in a way that I feel like highlighted the complexity of religion and belief more. And, you know, maybe the book isn't trying to do that. I'm just saying that for my personal tastes, it's not a portrayal that I find especially interesting or enjoyable to read, because I feel like it doesn't deal with hardship in the way that I would have liked, or just like kind of address it. And also I don't really love, basically, I felt like there was an over-reliance or an over-emphasis on like just trusting and things will work out, which is like, I'm a big fan of free will. My denomination, big fan of free will. So that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Again, your mileage is going to vary quite a bit on that. Some people are going to really enjoy those parts. And then finally, I'm going to talk really briefly about the writing and the retelling aspects. So the writing is a really interesting style because it's got a little bit of whimsy to it, and there were some really beautiful lines throughout. There were some places where it maybe got a little bit over descriptive, but as I said, there were also a lot of descriptions, like of, you know, the cities or the sites that they were seeing that were incredibly well done, very beautiful. And even though I was just talking about how like the chunk that was like the religious element didn't really work for me, there were also some lines through those sections that I thought were really beautiful and really evocative. There's one about scarred and sacred hands that I thought was beautiful and I'm obviously still thinking about. I do think that the genre combination of this book is interesting because like the way that some of the plot plays out makes it feel almost like it is trying to be like a steampunk or historical fantasy, but it's not. Like it's very firmly historical. There's not like the technological advancement you would expect in a steampunk. There's no magic like there would be in a historical fantasy. So I feel like the writing sometimes didn't quite click with the setting or what this book was like, what this book felt like when we weren't doing this very specific plot line that I'm talking around a lot because I don't want to give spoilers. But yeah, some parts of the writing I really liked, and again, some parts were not as much for me. I do think though that as a retelling, I think this book was really, really clever. There were so many times when I was like halfway through a scene when all of a sudden I would realize like, oh, this is a reference to this thing or this character in the Nutcracker, and I just really enjoyed that. Like, this is definitely not a strict retelling. It's more like certain elements or certain like plot points or images will be like pulled into the story, and I feel like Angela Bell did such a good job of working those into the book in a way that felt natural, and it was just like a fun like Easter egg, you know. Actually, it's funny because it felt almost like a scavenger hunt, which is what the main characters are going on. So I think that if you are familiar with the Nutcracker, that's going to add to your enjoyment, but I definitely think that you can like read this book, understand it, enjoy it without being a fan of the Nutcracker. Yeah, so anyway, those are my thoughts on A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure. Let me know if you guys are interested in it or planning to read it, planning to pick it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!